Welcome to our Cyber and Network Security app. Today we have a special guest, Elin. Luke is one of the longest professional web developer in Australia. And in past few years, he's been focusing on cybersecurity, and he has developed his own vulnerability scanner for a WordPress environment. So let's get into it.
Luke. So welcome, Luke, on my channel, where we talk about the cyber and network security. I'd invite you, Luke, to tell me something about you. How did you start your journey, and what you're working on now?
Thank you. That's two good questions. I guess I started my journey in computing in general quite some time ago. I guess I've always been interested in computers, and professionally I started working as a web developer for myself back in 1996. So I don't know if I'm Australia's longest professional web developer, but might be. I think more recently I've moved into cybersecurity, and I think using the word journey is a good way to describe it. I started out just focusing on web security and database security, and more generally now cybersecurity in general. So I provide services to my clients as they need them. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. And lately I've been teaching cybersecurity. So that's a short version of my story. So.
That's cool. And I know they developed some tool for
look, I currently am working on a cybersecurity vulnerability platform, and what it does, it looks for vulnerabilities specifically in the WordPress ecosystem. So I could see that security in general on the web is a big deal, and WordPress accounts for about, I don't know, depends who you believe, about half the web. And I could see situations occurring where a lot of owners of websites weren't really paying attention. A lot of them still don't pay attention to the security. So I built a mass vulnerability scanner that's capable of detecting whether or not you'd call them a vulnerability or a risk, I guess, depends on your point of view. But I'm detecting potential security hazards in WordPress websites, and I have a database, and we index and record them. And it's a work in progress. I've been working on it for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And it's to be determined what's going to happen with it and what I end up doing with it. So, but at the end of the day, it was a fun project to do, in the sense that just trying to build something at that scale is challenging. And the challenges that we're seeing in cybersecurity aren't going to be fixed one vulnerability at a time. It's going to be fixed with a more systematic, widespread approach to security. So that's what I've been doing. That's about as much as I can say about it, because at the moment it is a work in progress. But I'm excited to see where it goes. So
I think it's great. I use WordPress myself, and I have to admit I never paid too much attention to the security, but very interesting to see how this will go in the future.
WordPress in general has a mixed reputation for security. On one hand, people say it actually has terrible security. On the other hand, equal number of people say it's got pretty good security. I don't really have an opinion on whether it's good or it's terrible, other than to say it really is dependent on how it's set up and how it's maintained. A bit like anything with computing, you have to keep it patched and updated and maintained. And I think the biggest fundamental issue comes with what sort of strategies do you have for running a firewall and backups. There are a number of really useful tools out there people can use. WordFence is a great firewall. And Updraft is a great backup tool. That would be the two minimums that I would suggest, whether you have a site that has big security requirements or not, to be running. And it's one of those things. I guess what fascinates me about WordPress and security is because of its mass adoption. If a vulnerability is found or brought to light, it can affect a really large number of assets, as the nerds in cybersecurity say. So if you were to look at a plugin like Yoast SEO or Gravity Forms. Both of them have had security issues in the past, but when that happens, we're talking about maybe 1 million to 4 million sites being affected. And I would say the only other thing about WordPress is that if you have a vulnerability, somebody will find it and they'll find it fast. The amount of traffic that I see that's maliciously scanning for things is enormous now. The majority of the traffic that I'm looking at in log files is malicious, which is pretty sad state of affairs, really.
Oh, that's. I think that's in the future we will be encountering more and more malicious traffic going through the web. So.
Oh, look, I know you and I have shared some experiences, I guess, over the last sort of 10 weeks about some of the things we've seen. And I would say that it's a pretty consistent increase. And like I would say to everybody, in cybersecurity, the one thing that's unusual to sort of wrap your head around is not technicalities, but the culture of the fact that what we considered a bad day yesterday, for example, becomes the normal today, and tomorrow something more extreme will happen. And the result of that is we're looking at a threat environment where we see escalating levels of threat. It would be a bit like if people can imagine an interest rate going up and down, people expect that, or the stock market going up and down. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it just seems to go up. So we don't see a reduction in malicious activity. And there's not a single source to blame for it either. It's just in general it happens, and it's kind of a hard thing to deal with. It'd be a bit like going into a war, and the war never gets better. It just gets worse. And you know the next day you're going to wake up and it's going to be crappier. That's a pretty grim thing to deal with. And I think that in general is one of the reasons why cybersecurity is becoming such a big field, and it's becoming a specialized field and an ever-growing field. And I don't know how long we'll see this continual escalation for. I've never seen it de-escalate.
So if you could describe cybersecurity in your own words, what does that mean for you? Well, how would you describe it?
That's a good question. To me, I have a background in information systems. So I would say to describe cybersecurity would be pretty simple, that whoever is the owner of an asset, whether that be a database, a server, a mobile phone, a computer, should be entitled to a sense of security about the things they do on it, the data they store on it, and the way they interact with other systems. And I believe cybersecurity is all about, as people say in our industry, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. All users should have the right to that, but sadly, that's not the case. Vulnerabilities, bad coding, malicious actors are out there exploiting them. So to me, cybersecurity is no different to personal security, in that everybody who is online should feel that sense of safety and security about what they're doing. I think that's the way I would describe it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And maybe that will lead to other question. Why do you think there's so many, like you can see it in your industry, in your business, why do you think there's so many businesses and people exposed to the attacks every day, and what would be maybe long-term solution for it?
I think it's a two-part question. Why are things being exposed? I can honestly say that since 2020, we've seen things escalate, and I just think it's the world circumstances. And I won't get you banned on YouTube and say the C word, but the human malware that's spreading in terms of a virus meant that I think a lot of engineers and a lot of talented programmers were put out of work overseas. And I think a lot of talented engineers and programmers are looking for opportunities to feed their families, to put food on the table. And my personal opinion is that there's a lot of talented people who are struggling in the world, and they are going to do whatever they can in order to feed themselves. And it's not an excuse to say that it's okay for them to do this, but a lot of jurisdictions have very little regulation or rules around hacking and computer crime. So I see this as the reason why it's escalating. You can imagine that if you or I were an engineer in a country whose economic circumstances were terrible and we needed to feed our family, and our country has limited rules about computer crime or cybercrime, I could imagine that even good people would do things that are questionable in order to facilitate making sure that they survive. And I think maybe that's the problem, that the world's in an economic circumstance and in a geopolitical circumstance and health emergency. That means that people are looking for new ways of making money, and a lot of them just don't care. The sad thing is, if they were to turn their talents to making money legitimately, there would be more opportunities for them. I think instead of trying to break into a cryptocurrency exchange or to exploit a blockchain is silly when there's no rules and regulations in their countries. Why don't they create these platforms for themselves? It takes an equal amount of skill on the part of a programmer to break into something as it does to create something, in my opinion. And that might sound naive, but I think there are a lot of opportunities for people in a positive way, and instead, perhaps because of their mental health or the state of the world, that they're choosing to do crappy things pretty much. So that's my opinion. How are they going to get better? Don't know. I'm actually, I like to be optimistic about things in life, but I see the situation will probably continue as it is. I don't know. I think cybersecurity needs to be the responsibility of everyone. And again, that might sound, I don't know, like the right thing to say, but you know me, I have no filters, and I can honestly say that cybersecurity is not just the job of a dedicated team in an enterprise or organization or a government department, but it's the responsibility of everybody in it. So just simple things like don't click on an email with a link in it that is looking dubious. That sounds, I don't know, really like the obvious thing to do, but people are falling for these scams more and more, and don't answer phone calls that you don't know the number unless you really need to.
Do you think that would be reasonable to include some cybersecurity education on a basic levels, maybe from early childhood?
I think it's not just important. If we as a society will have a lot of questions for ourselves in 10 years if we don't start now. If we don't start teaching children reading, writing, and arithmetic, we need to also add cybersecurity and safety around it. I don't necessarily think that you would even call it security. I just think it would be the ethics and morality of operating in a cyber world would be the way to go. To teach younger children in an educational and fun manner about things that they should or shouldn't do online, things that they should and shouldn't respond to. I have a young son who's a teenager, and I hear stories about bullying and the like within high schools that kind of makes me cringe a little bit. It's like, so not only does potentially a child have to be bullied at school, then they'll go home and they're being bullied online. And we need to foster a culture where that doesn't happen. And when it does, people need to be called out about it. So I think that, it needs to be really encouraged, and we need to foster a culture in our society about education in and around information systems and cybersecurity. So I don't know how that works. I don't know what the program would look like, but I do think that there are people out there in the education areas that are starting to push this a bit more. So I'm encouraged by that, at least in Australia.
Yeah, hopefully we can see more of it in the future. And so, what would be your advice for a young professional starting in a new career in cybersecurity, or thinking for switching the career into the cybersecurity or internet security in general, maybe network?
I think possibly the first thing is that it's a difficult career to be in if you don't have an interest in technology. A good example would be myself and two friends we were chatting yesterday in a messenger. And to give you some context, these were my nerd friends in high school. I've always called ourselves nerds, always loved technology. And two out of the three of us were chatting about things we were going to buy for our computer. And the other person was like, oh gosh, I don't know what I would do. I'm not going to buy any of this. And one of my friends said, oh, to the other one, how come you don't know about this stuff anymore? You're a computer programmer. And he goes, I just use the computers and the systems provided at his university where he works as a programmer. He doesn't really have an interest beyond it being a functional tool. I would say that if you're coming into cybersecurity and don't have a profound interest in technology, maybe it's not the right field for you, because it's important that you have a passion for it. It would be like me being involved in the sporting industry. If I was involved in the sporting industry, I could do that. I could be functional, but I would find it challenging because I'm not that interested in sport. And so I'd say anybody coming into this as a career, the fundamental question to ask yourself is how interested in technology are you? Because you will need to be reading about it, watching videos on it, involving yourself in it outside the work environment in order to keep up with the industry as a whole. It's a tough industry with a lot of evolution that happens at a very, very fast pace. People that are switching careers from one industry into cybersecurity, I think the thing that they need to consider is what skills do they have from that industry and what connections and networks do they have from that industry to bring into cybersecurity. So I know you have a technical background and I have a technical background. It's easier for us to see how we can transition from, say, being a web developer or a programmer, or in your case, I hope you don't mind me saying, a network nerd, into security, because there's a natural sort of connection between the two. In fact, what you would do and what I would do in a web development and network administration has a lot to do with security. But if you're coming from outside, say you're a travel agent or an accountant or a bookkeeper, then perhaps look at using your skill sets from those industries that you've developed in cybersecurity. So perhaps if you're an accountant, for example, you could do forensics in terms of cybersecurity. If you're a travel agent, maybe you'd be really good at GRC or governance, risk and compliance, because they're very much used to the regulations in and around travel. So I think that people need to build a bridge from their previous industry and career to their new one without chopping and cutting themselves off from their old industry, because their old industry may be their first employer with their new skills. So if you've gone from the travel industry into cybersecurity, perhaps your first natural fit for a job would be to do something in and around cybersecurity and travel. So that would be my advice, is to think about the strategy that you would need to put in place in order to be successful at finding a job or career, or perhaps even building a business. So if you found yourself wanting to go into cybersecurity, perhaps you could offer consulting services or things like that. I don't think there's an easy answer to say, if you do this and this and this, you'll get this result. But I'm saying that think about what it is that you love to do. And what I mean by that is, what do you do in your spare time? If it's technology focused or interest, that's great. Think about what you've trained yourself in, how you've built your career, or even if you're just starting out, what really interests you, and then pursue that and use your existing networks in order to help you get leverage into this industry. A lot of people think you need a university degree or you need to have every certification. It's not true. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have the skills required to do the job. And if you have qualifications, that's often seen as a bonus in cybersecurity. It's not like becoming a lawyer or a doctor where you have to have that degree or you have to have that certification. Cybersecurity is largely unregulated in terms of the labor force. So that's something else to think about.
That's very interesting. What you're saying, that basically we should utilize your skill set, what you already know, and use it in a cyber and general, and just build a more knowledge around that. And I know that two of us, we we talk quite a lot about the language in cybersecurity and how important is the language to know how to
It's
speak.
the most important thing. And that's why when you said how would I describe cybersecurity, if you asked me a year ago, I would not have said confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But I think that really sums it up well. And the language in cybersecurity evolves, it adapts, new words come into play, old words go out of use. And that alone, having an understanding of the vocabulary and the terminology used in the industry is the most important thing. To not have to have every time a word is used described to you would be a big advantage. So when I teach cybersecurity or even information systems in general, I would focus a lot on the words being used and what they mean and highlighting them. It's difficult to describe, except for maybe using the word asset. In cybersecurity world, the word asset literally is referring to any device that is used by the organization. That device might be a phone, a database, a computer, a network adapter. It could be a whole bunch of things. But using the term asset and using the word, say, control, a control is any measure that's put into place to enhance the security, is important. But if you've never heard the word asset being applied to a database or the word control being applied to a firewall, it makes conversations more difficult. And so I would say that people should take the time to go and watch a whole bunch of YouTube channels, like your own, the fact that you're starting a channel, to watch people like Network Chuck. There are a whole bunch of them out there, Professor Messer, Computer Files. They all give you, I guess, an insight into how people in the industry talk. And it's one of the hardest things to come to terms with is the terminology. So,
oh, that's great. Yeah, that was basically my last question. What would be the best place where to get the knowledge and information about the cybersecurity if you want to learn more, you want to expand your field?
I guess it depends on how you learn. Personally, YouTube. It might sound ridiculous, but professional developers, cybersecurity experts, industry and thought leaders watch YouTube videos because there's so much rich content out there that's actually really good, that is able to help develop your interests. I think the interest actually has to come first. You will start to gravitate towards certain channels, and by watching those channels, I think is going to be an indicator of what you're interested in. So my angle on cybersecurity is around websites and databases. Gathering yours is around networking and security. For us to transition still means that we have to watch a lot of content in and around the field in general. And you maybe immerse yourself in the culture of it. Again, it's a suggestion, whether people like it or not. Maybe watch Mr. Robot, the series by Christian Slater. It's not an easy series to watch. It's certainly not, you're not going to walk away from it going, hey, I feel happy after watching it. It starts to give you that insight. Maybe it's dramatized, it's made for television and consumption, but it is showing you the mindset of a cybersecurity person or a computer hacker, and immerse yourself in that hacker culture. Just because I would call myself a hacker, but it doesn't mean that I'm a criminal and that I'm breaking into things. And I think maybe that's something that has never gotten better. Like the term hacker, everybody thinks that I'm some sort of person sitting out there breaking into ATMs or stealing crypto or whatever the case may be. It's not the case. In my mind, a hacker is a person who's curious about technology, wants to know how it can work, and usually they want to know how it works by breaking it. And by breaking it or breaking into it doesn't mean that it's unauthorized. It just means that you've got this curiosity about you. So I'd say develop your interest, find your passion, and then once you've really established this is a field for you, then really start to work on what aspect of the industry you want to work in. Because in the class that I taught, yourself was one of those people. You're an amazing student, by the way.
Thank you.
There are, I'm not just saying that, I've got no filters. There were 4 people, and I could see all 4 of them being very different from each other and having the opportunity to branch out in different directions. I would have thought all 4 of you will start in very different roles and very different jobs and pursue those things that they're good at. I would be a terrible person to employ in cybersecurity in certain roles. There are various roles in cybersecurity where I would not be challenged by it. I would not be the best worker. I could get the job done. For example, if I was working in GRC or governance, risk and compliance, I could do that job day in, day out, but it would bore the shit out of me, frankly. Even pen testing, like if I was going to be a pen tester or breaking into things in a structured legal manner, I think if I had to follow a red team or a pen testing team playbook, that too would bore me. I am autistic. I have ADHD. I'm dyslexic. And one of the things that I need is mental stimulation and an interest in a topic. And that's the other thing about cybersecurity, is that it attracts a lot of people who are on the autism spectrum. And if you are employing them, or if you are on the spectrum yourself, it's so important that you find the right stimulation in terms of your work in order to be good at it. So I can do boring jobs. I could be a database administrator. In fact, I've got to do some of my own database administrating today. But that's not what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about finding vulnerabilities, documenting them, and looking at the current threat environment. And that's what I would say to people. Find your passion, then work out how you can turn that into a viable career, because there are so many opportunities. There are new roles and new jobs being created in the industry as we speak. I mentioned to you yesterday, an Australian company announced, a very large Australian company announced they're setting up an offensive cybersecurity center. That's never been announced before. And I wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't public, but Wesfarmers, which is one of Australia's biggest companies by far, are setting up an offensive cybersecurity operations center. I don't know yet what that will look like. They have promised a no hackback policy, but we'll see. So that's what I'm saying. This is an emerging field. There are specialities now starting to be developed. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for people. I would say also one other thing about this industry that in my mind makes it unique in technology. It's a very difficult field to outsource things. So myself as a web developer face competition from all around the world. In cybersecurity, there are a lot of requirements, particularly around security clearances and the like. That means you have to be a resident in that country for a certain period of time as a minimum in order to qualify. So I think moving forward, it's a viable long-term career for people too, because the opportunities are not going to be outsourced overseas. They're not going to be fully automated. So I don't know, it's an exciting world. I think people who are passionate about technology would get a lot of joy out of it. And let's also be honest about the industry. It pays well. I would say the average web developer after 5 years versus the average cybersecurity person after 5 years in the career, the cybersecurity person may be 50 to 100% more income. And that I think is important for people if they're trying to build their future and think about what they're doing. If you're an employee, you're swapping your time for money. And if you're swapping your time for money, you are far better off swapping your time for money in something you enjoy and something that's rewarding. So, but that's where I stand on things. So I hope that's been a bit of an insight. I'm really proud of you for putting together this YouTube channel. It's one of those things that people need to do more of, to promote who they are, what they're doing, and what's important to them.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you for talking with me. And it's been a pleasure to spend time with you. And it's very exciting topics what we talk about today. And
no problems.
And I hope that we will see you here on the channel sometime in the future again.
Oh, absolutely. Look, if you have a specific topic you want me to talk about, I'm more than happy to. I think in general, the more we talk about cybersecurity as a community, the better off we all are, because there are too many negative stories about it all the time, and that's the ones that get the attention. The positive stories and the culture needs to be covered more. So well done.
Cool. Thank you.
It will be great to have a look back on our channel soon, and I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.